7 months along, with a nursery half assembled and a name already chosen, Claire had known the truth for 6 months before she acted. She'd spent that time building her exit quietly, methodically. And on a Tuesday at 2:47 p.m., the divorce papers arrived at his desk, signed, notarized, delivered by a process server she'd hired in secret. His secretary called him, voice trembling. He didn't believe her at first. Then he checked his phone and saw the text from Claire. "I know everything. I've known for 6 months. I just needed time to protect our child." The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the restaurant floor. So did everything else. Daniel Hargrove was the kind of man other men wanted to be. At 41, he had built Hargrove Capital Consulting from a 2-person operation running out of a rented office in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, into a firm worth just under $60 million. He drove a graphite-grey Porsche Cayenne, wore Brioni suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and had his hair cut every 2 weeks by a barber named Santiago, who ran a shop on Tryon Street and charged $300 a session because his clients could afford it, and because he was that good. Daniel had a firm handshake, remembered everyone's names, coached a youth soccer team on Saturday mornings, and attended church with his family. His wife Claire, their 6-year-old daughter Rosie, and his mother Patricia, who still called him Danny, even in public, and refused to be embarrassed about it. He tithed. He donated to the food bank. He once drove 2 hours in a rainstorm to help his college friend, Brett Caldwell, move a sectional sofa because Brett's back gave out. And there was no one else. He was, by every observable measure, a good man. That was the story people told about Daniel Hargrove. That was the story he told about himself. And stories, as anyone who has ever lived long enough to see one unravel knows, are the most dangerous things in the world. Not because they are false, but because they are almost always incomplete. Claire Sutton had married Daniel 11 years ago in a ceremony at the Biltmore estate in Asheville. She was 30 at the time, a structural engineer with a master's degree from Georgia Tech, and a laugh that made rooms feel warmer. Her bridesmaids were her 2 sisters, Donna and Ruth, and her college roommate, a woman named Priya Desai, who had flown in from London, specifically for the occasion. Daniel cried during his vows. Claire told him later, laughing, that it was the thing that sealed it for her. Not the ring, not the venue, not the fact that his family had money. The tears. A man who cries at his own wedding is either the most genuine person you'll ever meet, Priya had told Claire the night before the ceremony, sitting on the edge of the hotel bathtub with a glass of Prosecco, or the most dangerous actor. Claire had laughed. She'd been 29, head over heels, and entirely certain she knew which one Daniel was. For 9 of those 11 years, she was right. Then came Serena Walsh. Serena Walsh was 34 years old, a senior account manager at a marketing firm called Pinnacle Creative Group based in uptown Charlotte, and she had met Daniel Hargrove at a networking event hosted by the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce in September of the previous year. She was not a villain in the way that people expect villains to look. She wasn't calculating or predatory or dressed in red specifically to attract married men. She was smart, a little lonely, recently out of a 2-year relationship with a man named Greg, who had been wonderful in theory and exhausting in practice. She had a rescue greyhound named Atticus, an apartment she'd decorated herself with plants and second-hand bookshelves, and a habit of over-tipping at restaurants because she'd waitressed her way through college and never forgot what it felt like to count change at the end of a shift. She also did not know, for the first 2 months, that Daniel was married. This is the part of the story that gets complicated. This is the part where the villain becomes harder to locate. Daniel had approached her at the chamber event with practiced ease, not flirtatiously, but professionally, curious, asking about Pinnacle's work with mid-size companies in the regional market. He'd given her his card. She'd given him hers. They'd met for coffee a week later to talk about a potential referral partnership, because Hargrove Capital had clients who needed marketing help, and Pinnacle had clients who needed financial strategy. It was entirely legitimate. For 6 weeks, it was entirely legitimate. Then it wasn't. The shift happened the way these things always do, not with a declaration or a dramatic decision, but with a gradual erosion. A coffee meeting that ran 3 hours, a text sent at 9 p.m. that didn't need to be sent, a lunch that felt like something other than lunch. And then, one evening in November, after a glass of wine at a restaurant called the Capitol Grill on College Street, Daniel Hargrove kissed Serena Walsh in the parking garage on the 4th level, and she kissed him back, and neither of them stopped to ask the questions they should have asked. She found out he was married 10 days later, from his LinkedIn profile of all places, a congratulatory comment from a colleague on a post about a firm anniversary that mentioned his wife Claire by name. She had texted him immediately. "Are you married?" He had called her within 30 seconds. He was in his car. She could hear road noise. "Yes," he said. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." There was a long silence, a silence that should have been the end of it. "Are you happy?" she asked, because she was 34 and tired and had convinced herself this was a reasonable question to ask a man you just kissed 4 times. "No," he said. And that was the lie that built the entire architecture of the next 8 months. He wasn't unhappy, the truth was. He was comfortable in a way that had curdled into restlessness. Claire was wonderful, genuinely, irreproachably wonderful. But Daniel had the particular affliction of men who are given everything they need and find ways to be hungry anyway. He was bored with the life he had spent a decade building. He wanted the feeling of beginning something again. He wanted to be chosen, freshly and urgently, the way you only get chosen at the very start. Serena gave him that, and Daniel, in return, gave her the edited version of himself, the version without responsibility, without history, without the full weight of who he actually was. By January, they were meeting twice a week. By February, he had a second phone, a burner purchased at a Target in Concord with cash. By March, Claire Hargrove was pregnant with their second child. Claire found out about the affair on the 3rd of April, not because Daniel slipped up, not because Serena reached out, not because of a text notification or a receipt or lipstick on a collar. Those were the things that happened in movies. What happened in real life was smaller and more devastating. A parking notification. Daniel's Porsche had been ticketed on a Tuesday evening at a parking structure on South Tryon Street, the same structure adjacent to Serena Walsh's apartment building. Claire knew this because she handled the family's auto insurance and had signed up for parking violation alerts from the city system 2 years earlier, after Daniel had let a $45 ticket balloon into a $300 warrant, and she'd had to sort it out. The ticket was time-stamped 11:42 p.m. Daniel had told her he was at a dinner with colleagues from Atlanta. He'd been home by midnight, kissed the top of her head, said the dinner ran long. She looked at the address on the ticket. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went upstairs, checked on Rosie, got into bed, and said nothing. She did not cry that night. She would cry later, alone, in the guest bathroom, with the shower running so no one could hear her. But that night, she lay next to the man she had been married to for 11 years, and she made a decision that would take 6 months to fully execute. Claire Sutton, she had always kept her maiden name for professional use, something Daniel had never questioned, was not an impulsive woman. She was a structural engineer. She understood load-bearing walls. She understood what happened when you removed support systems without accounting for the collapse. She had watched her mother leave her father in a rage when Claire was 16, watched her mother get precisely nothing in the settlement because she'd moved out of the family home on emotion rather than strategy, watched a woman who deserved better end up with almost nothing because she'd acted before she'd planned. Claire was not going to make that mistake. The next morning, she called Priya Desai in London. Not to cry, to think. "I need a family law attorney," she said. "The best one in North Carolina, specifically one who handles high net worth divorces and doesn't lose." Priya, who worked in finance and knew lawyers the way mechanics knew cars, said, "Give me 48 hours." 2 days later, Claire was on a call with a woman named Margaret Holloway, a partner at Holloway and Stein Family Law in Raleigh, who had a reputation in North Carolina legal circles for being the kind of attorney opposing counsel dreaded seeing across a conference table. Margaret had been practicing for 22 years. She had never lost a case that involved hidden assets. "I'm 7 weeks pregnant," Claire told her on that first call. "I need you to understand that everything I do from this point forward is about protecting this child and my daughter." "Then you've come to the right place," Margaret said. Over the following 3 months, while Daniel came home for dinner every night, played Barbies with Rosie on Sunday mornings, rubbed Claire's feet when she complained about swelling, and told her he loved her with what appeared to be complete sincerity, Claire was quietly, methodically, and with the precision of an engineer calculating structural loads, building her case. She hired a private investigator named Howard Beck, a retired Charlotte, Mecklenburg detective who charged $175 an hour and had the demeanor of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Howard documented 23 meetings between Daniel and Serena Walsh over the course of 8 weeks. He photographed them at restaurants, at the parking structure on South Tryon, twice at a boutique hotel in Myers Park called the Dunhill that charged $340 a night and offered a discretion policy that evidently did not extend to men whose wives had hired professional observers. Howard also discovered, in the course of his work, something that Claire had not asked him to find, but that would ultimately matter enormously. Daniel had a second, LLC. It was called Hargrove Strategy Advisors, registered in Delaware, and it was being used to route consulting income off-book. Howard found it through cross-referencing EIN numbers in state filings with registered agent disclosures, the kind of thing that took a skilled investigator about 4 hours to trace. The LLC held accounts totaling approximately $2.3 million, none of which appeared on the joint financial statements Daniel reviewed with Claire each quarter. Claire passed this information to Margaret Holloway, who said, very quietly, "Oh, he made our job so much easier." In the meantime, Claire continued to be a perfect wife. Not because she was performing, not because she was comfortable, but because she understood that the moment Daniel suspected anything was the moment he would start protecting the assets she needed access to. She smiled. She made dinner. She went to her OB appointments and sent Daniel photos of the ultrasound because he asked to see them and because the baby was real and hers and not part of any strategy. She named the baby. In her head, alone, in the quiet of the evenings when Daniel was supposedly at the office. She named her Charlotte, after the city that had been her home for 12 years. She never told Daniel. It was a Tuesday in June, and it was already 91 degrees in Charlotte by noon. Daniel Hargrove had told Claire that morning that he had back-to-back client meetings from 11 a.m. through the evening, possibly dinner with a hedge fund manager named Tom Pierce, who was considering moving his portfolio to Hargrove Capital. Tom Pierce was real. The dinner was not. Claire knew this because she had, 2 weeks earlier, looked up Tom Pierce's public calendar through his firm's website and confirmed he was in Seattle on that date for a conference. She had said nothing. She had kissed Daniel on the cheek and told him to drive safe. At 12:15 p.m., Daniel Hargrove walked into a restaurant called Bardo on East Moorhead Street, a small, upscale Italian place with low lighting and a wine list that took itself seriously. He was meeting Serena Walsh. Howard Beck, parked in a grey Honda Civic across the street, photographed them through the restaurant window from 12:17 until 2:03 p.m. He photographed them sharing a bottle of wine. He photographed Daniel reaching across the table to touch Serena's hand. He photographed Serena laughing, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that involved her whole face. Inside the restaurant, at approximately 1:30 p.m., Daniel ordered a second glass of Barolo and told Serena something that would, in the reconstruction of events that followed, feel almost unbearably ironic. "I'm going to figure out a way to make this work," he said. "I want to be with you. I just need time to handle things properly." Serena was quiet for a moment. She swirled her wine. "Daniel," she said carefully, "you've been saying that for 4 months." "I know." "Claire is pregnant." "I know. That makes this—" She stopped, searched for the word. "Complicated," he offered. "I was going to say real," she said. "That makes this real. A baby is real. You can't just—" She stopped again, set down her glass. "I need you to decide." "I will," he said. "I promise." He meant it, in the way that people mean things when they are sitting in a beautiful restaurant with a person who makes them feel young and unburdened. He meant it the way you mean things before the world reminds you of what you have already committed to. At 2:47 p.m., his desk phone rang at Hargrove Capital's offices on Stonewall Street. His executive assistant, a woman named Linda Forsyth, who had worked for Daniel for 7 years and had once called him the best boss she'd ever had, picked up the call from reception. A process server named David Nguyen had arrived at the building and was asking for Daniel Hargrove by name to deliver a legal document. Linda told him Daniel was in meetings. David Nguyen told her it didn't matter. He just needed a confirmed representative of the named party. Linda, who understood exactly what a process server was, accepted the documents herself, as she was legally authorized to do as his registered office agent. She called Daniel's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called the burner number she didn't know existed. She didn't have it. She called the restaurant, having tracked down the reservation through his calendar. The host put her through to the table. "Mr. Hargrove?" the host said, holding out a phone to Daniel, who looked up from his wine glass with mild surprise. "This is he. I have a Linda Forsyth on the phone for you. She says it's urgent." He took the phone. Linda told him, in the carefully modulated tone of someone delivering terrible news with professional composure, that a process server had delivered legal documents to the office, that they appeared to be divorce filings, that she had signed for them, that they were on his desk. The restaurant was quiet. Serena was watching him. He turned slightly in his chair. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He handed the phone back to the host. He sat very still for approximately 5 seconds. Then he reached for his wine glass, and his hand was not steady enough, and the glass caught the edge of a fork and went sideways and shattered across the marble floor, red wine spreading across white tile in a pattern that the busboy who cleaned it up later would describe to his girlfriend that evening as looking like something out of a crime scene. "Daniel," Serena said. "What's wrong?" He looked at her. His face had done something she hadn't seen before. It had collapsed inward. The Daniel she knew, assured, smooth, in control, was suddenly, entirely, gone. "She filed," he said. "Who filed what?" He stood up. He put $300 in cash on the table without counting it. He picked up his jacket. "I have to go," he said. And he walked out of Bardo on East Moorhead Street into the 91-degree Charlotte afternoon, leaving Serena Walsh sitting alone at a table with a half-eaten plate of pasta and a completely different understanding of the situation she was in than she'd had 20 minutes before. Linda Forsyth was at her desk when Daniel came through the glass doors of Hargrove Capital. She had been at her desk for the past 35 minutes, having done in that time approximately none of the work she was supposed to be doing. She had been, instead, sitting very still and processing the particular discomfort of a person who works for someone they respect and has just learned something that changes the lens through which everything is viewed. Daniel walked past her without his usual greeting. She didn't call after him. He went into his office and closed the door. The envelope was on his desk, large and cream-colored, with the return address of Holloway and Stein Family Law, Raleigh, North Carolina, in the upper left corner. His name was on the front in black ink, his actual legal name, Daniel Edward Hargrove. He sat down. He didn't touch it for a full minute. Then he opened it. The filing was 47 pages long. It alleged adultery, with documentation. It alleged concealment of marital assets, specifically referencing the Delaware LLC, Hargrove Strategy Advisors, by name, EIN number, and estimated account balance. It named Serena Walsh. It attached photographic evidence, including time-stamped images taken by a licensed private investigator. It included bank statements. It included a forensic accounting request. It included a petition for full physical custody of Rosie and the unborn child pending outcome of proceedings. It was, in the assessment of his own attorney, a man named Stephen Polk at Moorhead Legal, who he would call 40 minutes later, in a voice that Stephen would later describe to his partner as the sound of a man understanding the flaw has disappeared, one of the most comprehensively prepared divorce filings he had ever seen outside of a major celebrity case. "She's had a lawyer for months," Stephen told him. "This wasn't put together quickly. You're looking at someone who planned this very carefully." "She's 7 months pregnant," Daniel said, as if this was an explanation or a contradiction. "That doesn't change the filing," Stephen said. "It may affect optics in a custody proceeding, but right now what you need to understand is that they know about the LLC." There was a silence. "How?" Daniel said. "Forensic investigation. Private investigator. These things aren't hard to find if you know to look." Stephen paused. "Daniel, the LLC. How much is in those accounts?" Daniel stared at his desk. Outside his window, Charlotte's skyline sat in the summer haze, indifferent and enormous. "About 2.3 million, he said. Stephen made a sound that was not quite a sigh, and not quite the word he actually wanted to say. "Okay," he said finally. "Don't move any money. Don't contact Claire. Don't contact the other woman. Don't post anything, text anything, or say anything to anyone without talking to me first. I'm going to make calls." Daniel sat in his office for another hour after he hung up. Linda brought him a cup of coffee at some point and set it on the edge of his desk and left without saying anything, which he would remember later as one of the kindest things anyone did for him that day. At 5:15 p.m., he picked up his phone and called Claire. She let it ring to voicemail. He called again. "Voicemail." He texted, "Claire, I got the papers. Can we please talk?" The read receipt appeared almost immediately. She had read it. No reply came. At 5:45, he drove to their home in Dilworth, the house they had bought together 8 years ago, the house with the magnolia tree in the front yard, and Rosie's growth chart penciled on the inside of the pantry doorframe, and the kitchen Claire had redesigned herself because she understood load-bearing walls and knew exactly which ones could safely come down. His key worked in the lock, which surprised him. He'd expected it not to. Claire was in the living room. She was sitting on the couch with her feet up on the ottoman. She was 7 months pregnant, and her ankles were swollen, and she had spent the better part of the day in a state of preternatural calm that had cost her more than she would ever tell anyone. Rosie was at her grandmother Patricia's house. The house was very quiet. Claire looked at him when he came in. She did not look like a woman who was hurt. She looked like a woman who had finished hurting and was now simply waiting for the next thing to begin. "Sit down, Daniel," she said. He sat. "I'm not going to cry," she told him. "I've already done that. So don't wait for that, because it's not coming." He nodded. "I know about Serena Walsh," she said. "I know about the LLC. I know about the hotel in Myers Park, the parking structure on South Tryon. The dinner you told me was with Tom Pierce in April, the phone you bought at Target in Concord in February." She paused. "I know a lot of things, Daniel." He didn't ask how. He understood, sitting there, that asking how was pointless. The how didn't matter. "Claire." "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Don't say you're sorry yet. Not because you're not, but because right now sorry is a word that's about you, and I need this conversation to be about our children." He closed his mouth. "I have 2 things to say," she said. "The first is that I want you out of this house by Friday. Not because I'm being dramatic, because I need Rosie to see stability, and I cannot provide stability while you're here, and I'm managing what I feel about you, so I need space to do that." He nodded. "The second thing," she said, and here her voice changed by a fraction. Not much, but enough to show that underneath the engineering of it all, there was still a woman who had cried into running showers for 6 months. "Is that whatever else happens between us legally, you are going to be present for this baby. You are going to be in the delivery room. You are going to be her father. I will not use her as a weapon. But I need you to understand that the life we planned is over, and I am making a new plan. And I need to know whether you're going to cooperate with that or fight it." He looked at her. His wife of 11 years, the mother of his children, the person who had apparently spent the better part of 6 months dismantling everything he thought he was hiding, calmly, methodically, and with more dignity than he deserved. "I'll cooperate," he said. His voice was rough in a way he couldn't control. She nodded. "Good," she said. "Then I think that's all for tonight." He stood. He looked around the living room, at the throw pillows Claire had picked up at a market in Charleston, at the framed photo of all of them at the Blue Ridge Parkway, overlook from 2 summers ago, at the growth chart, just visible through the open pantry door. He looked at it all with the particular focus of a person understanding they are seeing something for the last time. "I love you," he said. It came out before he could stop it, and he meant it, which was the most confusing and devastating part of all of it. "I know," she said. It was not "I love you too," but it was honest, and honesty was the only currency that meant anything anymore. The story, up to this point, reads like the kind of cautionary tale people share on social media, with comments like, "He deserved everything he got," and "She's a queen," and similar pronouncements that feel satisfying in the way that simple stories feel satisfying. But nothing that happens to real people is simple. And what came next was not simple at all. 12 days after the papers arrived, Serena Walsh called Margaret Holloway's office. Not to interfere, not to cause trouble, but because Serena Walsh had spent 12 days sitting alone in her apartment with Atticus the greyhound, processing the reality that she had been in a relationship with a man who had concealed his marriage from her for 2 months and concealed his intentions from her for 8 more, and she had some information that she believed Claire Hargrove deserved to have. Margaret took the call. She listened. When it was over, she sat at her desk for a long time before calling Claire. "Serena Walsh wants to speak with you," Margaret said. Claire was quiet. "About what?" "About Daniel," Margaret said. "Specifically about something he told her that I think you need to hear from her directly." 2 days later, in an arrangement that Margaret had mediated and that both women's attorneys had reviewed for appropriateness, Claire Hargrove and Serena Walsh met in person for the first and only time. It was at a coffee shop in Noda, a neighborhood in Charlotte neither woman typically frequented, specifically chosen for its lack of people who might know them. Claire arrived first, enormous and composed, ordered a decaf and sat by the window. Serena arrived 4 minutes later, looking like someone who hadn't slept well in a week, which was accurate. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Serena said, "I want to say first that I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help you. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I need to say it." Claire looked at her steadily. "Okay." "I didn't know about you for the first 2 months," Serena said. "When I found out, I should have ended it. I didn't. That's on me, and I'm not here to excuse it." "Then why are you here?" Claire asked. Serena folded her hands around her coffee cup. She looked at the table. "Because he told me something in February," she said. "Something I think you should know." February was the month Daniel had bought the burner phone. February was the month Claire was 11 weeks pregnant with Charlotte. "He told me," Serena said slowly, "that your pregnancy was an accident. That it hadn't been planned. That you had both agreed to stop trying after Rosie, and that you had gotten pregnant without." She stopped. Claire was very still. "He implied," Serena said, "that you had gotten pregnant intentionally, to keep him from leaving." The coffee shop was small. The music playing overhead was soft jazz. Someone at the counter was ordering a latte. "He said that to you," Claire said. Not a question, a recalibration. "Yes." Claire placed her hands flat on the table. She breathed. The baby, Charlotte, moved, a flutter beneath her ribs. "Our daughter," Claire said, precisely and carefully, "was planned. I have text messages from Daniel from November, 3 months before I conceived, in which he says he wants to try for a second child. I have a shared notes document in which we tracked my ovulation cycles together. I have a conversation on email in which he says, and I am quoting, 'I can't wait to give Rosie a little sister.'" Serena closed her eyes. "He lied to you," Claire said. Not accusatorially, factually, the way an engineer states a load calculation. He was lying to both of us, but he was telling different lies to each of us. Serena opened her eyes. They were wet. "To me," Claire continued, "he was a devoted husband who cried at his own wedding. To you, he was a man trapped in an unhappy marriage with an accidental pregnancy, looking for an exit. He constructed completely different versions of himself and showed each version to the person it was most likely to work on." The silence between them was significant. Not hostile. Something more complex than hostility. "I thought I knew him," Serena said. "So did I," Claire said. "For 9 years I actually did." Then Serena said the thing that changed the entire legal proceeding. "He told me he was planning to move money offshore. In March, he was talking to someone, I don't know who, he didn't give me a name, about a structure he could use to reduce the visible value of Hargrove Capital before any divorce proceedings." Claire looked at her. "He said this to you specifically?" "He said it on a phone call I was partially on in February. He stepped away, but I heard part of it. He said, 'We need to reduce the documented value before Q3. He said something about a valuation consultant and about timing." She paused. "I didn't understand it then. I understand it now." Claire picked up her phone and sent a text to Margaret Holloway that said only, "Call me after 3. New development. Significant." "Serena," Claire said, "would you be willing to provide a sworn affidavit?" Serena Walsh, who had come to this coffee shop out of guilt and some residual sense of justice, who had spent 12 days alone with a greyhound and a great deal of self-recrimination, who had come to understand that she had been as much a tool in Daniel's self-construction as anything else, looked at the woman across the table, 7 months pregnant, composed in a way that made Serena feel ashamed and awed in equal measure, and said, yes. What followed over the next 4 months was, to those few people who knew the full scope of it, one of the most comprehensive dismantlings of a carefully constructed false life that the Charlotte legal community had seen in a decade. Margaret Holloway took Serena's affidavit to the forensic accounting firm she used on complex marital asset cases, a firm run by a woman named Dr. Patricia Sung, who had a Ph.D. in financial mathematics from Duke and who had once helped unravel a Ponzi scheme that had operated for 11 years before anyone caught it. Dr. Sung was given access to Hargrove Capital's financial records through discovery and was asked specifically to look for signs of pre-litigation asset restructuring. She found them in 6 days. Between January and April, the period covering Daniel's affair escalation, and the 3 months before the divorce filing, Hargrove Capital had entered into a consulting fee arrangement with a company called Atlantic Peak Advisory Services that had received $890,000 in payments described as strategic development retainers. Atlantic Peak Advisory Services was registered in the Cayman Islands. Its sole director, on paper, was a man named Richard Phelps, who turned out, upon further investigation, to be Daniel Hargrove's college roommate from UNC Chapel Hill, a man Claire had met exactly twice at firm anniversary events. The money had gone out of Hargrove Capital as a business expense and was sitting, effectively, in an account that Daniel could access after proceedings concluded and that would not show up in the marital asset calculation. When Stephen Paulk showed Daniel the forensic report in a meeting that also included Daniel's newly added second attorney, a specialist in financial litigation named Frank Torres, who charged $850 an hour and had an office that made you feel like you were losing money just by sitting in it. Daniel said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, "I need a minute." He walked to the bathroom adjacent to the conference room and threw up. He stood at the sink and ran cold water over his wrists the way his mother had taught him to do when he was a child running a fever. He looked at himself in the mirror. He was 41 years old. He had a successful business. He had a daughter who called him Daddy and ran to the door when she heard his car in the driveway. He had a baby daughter on the way, Charlotte, though he didn't know her name yet, who would grow up in a world shaped entirely by what he was choosing right now. He had a woman he'd made promises to in a restaurant who was now a sworn witness against him. He had a wife who had spent 6 months watching him lie to her face and had said nothing, not out of weakness, but out of strategy, and He understood this now, standing at a sink in Frank Torres's bathroom, out of a love for her children that was so structural, so load-bearing, that it had held everything up while she quietly, carefully dismantled everything that was false around it. He went back into the conference room. "Tell me what I need to do," he said. Stephen Polk, who had been a divorce attorney for 18 years and had seen exactly 3 men say those words with that particular inflection, recognized it for what it was. Not a legal strategy question, but a human one. "You settle," Stephen said. "You settle fully, transparently, and without conditions. You open every account, return the offshore funds, and you cooperate with whatever custody arrangement Claire's attorney puts forward. You do this because it is right, and because if you don't, the financial misconduct alone will destroy you in court, and you will spend the next 3 years in litigation while your daughters grow up without knowing what stable looks like." Daniel nodded. He called Richard Phelps that evening and told him to prepare to return the funds. Richard, who had done this as a favor, and who had a wife of his own and children of his own, and who had spent 4 months feeling deeply uncomfortable about the whole arrangement, said, with obvious relief, "Thank God. Yes. Consider it done." The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks. They were, by the account of both Margaret Holloway and Stephen Polk, who would run into each other at a Bar Association event 18 months later and exchange the knowing look of people who survived the same difficult thing from opposite sides, among the most thorough and specific they had ever been involved with. Claire received the family home in Dilworth. She received primary physical custody of both children, with Daniel having generous and structured access. She received a fair percentage of Hargrove Capital's documented value, calculated without the fraudulently reduced numbers, meaning the offshore funds were brought back, valued and included. She received child support structured to scale with the firm's revenue, with quarterly financial disclosures required. Daniel kept the firm. He kept his car. He moved into a rental apartment in Southend. Nice, but not a statement. His mother Patricia called him the week he moved in and asked him, without preamble, whether he was all right. "No," he said. "Good," she said, which surprised him. "If you were all right now, I'd be worried about who you'd become. You're supposed to not be all right. That's how you know what you did matters." She paused. "Is Claire okay?" "She's better than okay," he said. "She's remarkable." "I know," Patricia said. "I've always known. I hoped you did too." Charlotte Hargrove was born on September 14th at Carolina's Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, at 7:22 in the morning. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had Claire's mouth and Daniel's dark hair, and she entered the world with the kind of furious, indignant cry that makes nurses smile because it means every system is working exactly as it should. Daniel was in the delivery room. He had asked, quietly and without pressure, if he could be there. Claire had thought about it for 3 days and then said yes. Not for him, but because the baby deserved to have her father see her first breath, and because Claire had decided, somewhere in the terrible months behind her, that she was not going to allow her grief to make her smaller than she actually was. He held Charlotte for the first time at 7:39 a.m. in a chair by the window, with the early Charlotte morning coming through the blinds in strips of pale gold. He held her, and he was completely undone, not performing it, not managing it, just undone. And Claire watched from the bed and felt, in spite of everything, in spite of all of it, the complicated truth that grief and love are not opposites, that you can mourn the loss of a life and still love the people in it, that it is possible to feel both things simultaneously without either cancelling the other out. "Charlotte," he said very quietly to the baby. Hi. Hi, Charlotte. Claire had not told him her name in advance. He looked up. How did you know? I didn't, he said. It's just, she looks like a Charlotte. Claire turned her head toward the window. Priya Desai flew in from London 3 days later and held Charlotte and cried, and then took Claire for a walk around the hospital garden while Daniel stayed with the baby. And on that walk, Claire said the thing she had been holding since April. I'm going to be okay, she said. Priya looked at her. I know, Priya said. I've known that since the day you called me. I'm not performing it, Claire said. I actually believe it. That's the difference between you and most people, Priya said. They walked in the September morning, past the hospital garden's roses, and Claire Sutton, who had built her life with structural care and who had watched it shift beneath her, and who had responded not by collapsing, but by engineering something new from the materials she had, breathed in the air and let herself believe in the plan she had made for what came next. 6 months after Charlotte was born, Daniel Hargrove went into therapy. Not because a court ordered it, not because Stephen Polk told him to for optics, but because his daughter Rosie, who was 7 years old and sharper than he had given her credit for, asked him one evening during his custody weekend why he looked sad even when he was smiling. He had stared at her. He had said, "That's a very perceptive thing to notice, Rosie Bear." And she had said, with the absolute clarity of a 7-year-old, "You should talk to someone, Daddy. That's what Mama says when something is wrong that a person can't fix by themselves." He had cried in the car on the way home, and the following Monday he called a therapist named Dr. James Whitfield and made an appointment. He went every week. He also called Serena Walsh once, in October, because he felt he owed her the truth he had never given her. He told her that the things he'd said about Claire, about the pregnancy, about their marriage, those had been lies built for the specific purpose of making her feel less guilty about being with him. He told her she had been, in a sense, a victim of his construction, as much as Claire had been. He said he was sorry. She listened to all of it. When he was finished, she said, "I appreciate you saying that. I hope you become a better person. I don't think we should talk again." He said, "I think that's fair." And that was the last time they spoke. Serena Walsh, for her part, moved to Denver in the spring. She took Atticus the Greyhound, found a job at a smaller marketing firm where she knew nobody, and spent 8 months deliberately not dating anyone before eventually, tentatively, beginning to trust herself again. She became the kind of person who asked the important questions early and accepted the discomfort of honest answers. Hargrove Capital survived. Daniel was a good businessman, whatever else he was, and the firm's clients, most of whom never knew the full story, stayed. He restructured the company, made 3 good hires, and moved the Delaware LLC back under the main entity. He sat across from his partner, a man named Curtis Webb, who had been with the firm for 6 years, in November, and told him everything. Curtis listened. When Daniel was done, Curtis said, "You need to understand that this is what I think of you right now. I think you had everything, and you were greedy for more, and people got hurt. I'm going to give you the chance to be different, because I've watched you for 6 years, and I know you have it in you. But I need you to understand that who you are from here is entirely up to you." Daniel nodded. "I do understand," he said. "That's the thing about hitting the actual bottom. You understand all of it." Claire Sutton took a 6-month leave from her firm after Charlotte was born, and when she returned on her terms. 4 days a week, a 4 p.m. hard stop, a team she had hand-chosen. She redecorated the Dilworth house, not dramatically, not as an act of erasure, but thoughtfully, room by room, letting each space become something that was entirely hers and her children's. She kept Rosie's growth chart on the pantry doorframe. She started a new one, with Charlotte's first measurement at 4 months old, a single small pencil mark near the floor. Priya Desai visited again in the spring and sat at Claire's newly refinished kitchen table and watched Claire nurse Charlotte while Rosie showed her grandmother Patricia a crayon drawing of the whole family, including— Rosie had decided this herself without being prompted— a figure labelled Daddy in her careful 7-year-old printing, standing to the side but still inside the frame. Patricia held the drawing for a long time. "She drew him in," Patricia said to Claire quietly. "She loves him," Claire said simply. "He's her father. I'm not going to teach her not to." Patricia looked at her with the expression of a woman who had raised a son who hadn't deserved this woman and who understood that completely. "You're remarkable," Patricia said. "I'm not," Claire said. "I'm just a person who decided what mattered most and built toward that." She looked at Charlotte, small and milk-drunk and entirely unaware of the architectural complexity of the world she'd been born into. "She's going to know the truth someday," Claire said, "when she's old enough. I'm not going to hide what happened. But she's going to know it in the context of a life that's working. That's the goal, that everything works." Outside the kitchen window, the magnolia tree was in full spring bloom, enormous and stubborn and improbable, its roots going so far down into the Dilworth clay that no amount of wind had ever touched it. Some things, built right, survive everything. This story isn't about a bad man and a perfect woman. It's about what happens when a person stops being honest with their partner, with the people they claim to love, and most devastatingly, with themselves. Daniel Hargrove had everything a person could want, and he dismantled it piece by piece in search of something he couldn't even name. And Claire Sutton, who could have screamed, could have crumbled, could have made every decision from the raw wound of betrayal, instead chose to plan, to protect, and ultimately to rebuild. The lesson isn't hire a private investigator. The lesson is that integrity is structural. It's load-bearing. Remove it, and eventually everything comes down. If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust, about choices, about what we owe the people who love us, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and full of the kind of truth that fiction can't manufacture, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we drop new episodes every week. Your support is what keeps this going. Don't just watch, be part of it.